Moses was talking to them, and he was saying, no, God calls you an image bearer of His. You're all individuals made in the image of God, created to be free and to go out and subdue the earth and create families individually, right? And so you just think about this, and it's like it was so radically different. Christianity is more and more showing itself to be radically different from all the other worldviews surrounding us today.
So we've determined to have a more intentional mission for ourselves, to be clear in what guides our discussion, and so that people can understand what we're about, and have kind of that clear statement. So we've phrased it up, and it maybe feels a little contrived at first, but I think it is succinct and definitely covers also the broad range of the subject matter that we like to include. But our goal here is to help set our hope in the glory of Christ the King. That's the main goal.
Yeah.
But along the way, we recognize the need to consider the events of the day and the movements of the times. Mm. So that is our current events, as well as these larger influences, philosophic kind of ideas and things that are shaping the times.
There's a few things happening right now, just a little bit.
I think we can point out an item or two, and then, but all that is for the purpose that our lives not be lived in vain.
Correct.
And we're
so you don't wake up one day and sitting on your porch at 60 and you're going, I wasted it. Like, I wasted it. And you don't ever know that you're wasting it in the moment, right? You don't ever know you're wasting it in the moment. It's one of those things that you reflect upon, unless someone or something or someone has told you how to live your life so that you can align it accordingly, so that you're not in that place where you look back and you've wasted it.
Well, and I'd say that, just hearing you talk about it, and I'm sure this is true for both of us, because we're very much wired this way. And that's the reason we do this. Is because our great concern is that our lives not be lived in vain.
Amen.
I mean, and even in such a way that along the way it's been, something that we have to wrestle with, in a sense that our life not be about our own vain glory.
Yeah.
So there's a vanity there, right, that it be spent on us.
Yeah. Setting your hope in blank. Everybody fills out that gap. I mean, that blank, right? Everybody inserts something there. Every worldview on the face of the earth forces you to insert something there, right? The question is just, what do you put there? And are you that arrogant to put setting our hopes on myself, my feelings, right? What I see as good.
Like, what makes me happy.
Are you that arrogant that man, if you look back to last year, you did things that didn't make you happy in your life.
But the answer is yes.
Yes,
we are.
We are. I've done it. Maybe Dustin's done it,
Well, and because even though there are many influences out there that are eager to grab us and captivate us and lead us in a direction that is astray, most fundamental to all of human nature and existence is just simply our own sin and our own tendency toward our selfish motive. And so that is our happiness and contentment and all these things that aren't wrong desires, but we're misguided in our efforts to fulfill them. And so, we, the two of us, have been misguided in our life because of our efforts to fulfill a desire for glory, and we wanted it to be about ours. And that's, we're all doing that in one form or another. And like you said, we need people, we need a person, we need a source of knowledge and truth that will come along and guide us in the right direction. Otherwise, we're doomed to go astray.
Yeah, and it's a feeling in that that blank is a daily activity, right? It's not, I filled it in one time in the past when I said, when I walked an aisle and I prayed a prayer, right? Well, I filled that blank in when I was 6 years old. No. It's daily. You surrender daily unto something, right? So I could have been, as a Christian, you might look at my activity in the moment and go, hypocrite, but it's because I didn't surrender that activity that day unto Christ, right? So it's a daily surrender. You pick up your cross and follow me daily, right? So I could have done it yesterday and maybe I didn't do it today. So I'm just trying to point out, like, it's a daily thought process of what to fill that gap in with. And the more consistent that you get as a Christian, the more joyful your life is. I mean, it just is. The more joy in your life will be based upon your consistency in filling that blank in.
Well, and I'd say in
I said joy.
Well, and
not happiness.
No. I'm not.
I didn't know if you were going.
I don't make that distinction. They're the same to me ultimately. But the consistency that you need is based on the Word of God and His truth, not just any sort of consistency.
Right. True. Because
in the end, those things prove to be inconsistent for one, which is probably the point you were making. But that is very much what we're trying to do in setting our hope on the glory of Christ the King.
Yes.
Because it's about Him and not about us.
And we filter everything that we talk about in terms of, the events of the day and the movements of the time. We filter that through this lens.
We hope to.
We hope to. We try to.
We get caught up and
I'm pressing,
confused sometimes ourselves.
I'm pressing that first point, that first blank, because you do too. Right? You filter it through whatever you fill in that blank with as well. And that's what we have to understand, that everything that we're seeing, we're filtering it through some lens. So, again, if you fill in that blank with setting our hopes in myself, then you're determining what the events and the movements are based on your own knowledge, which can be easily deceived, right? Easily deceived in moments. And wicked people are actively working to deceive you. Like, that's their goal, right? It's always been the story of human history, is that wicked men with power and control working to deceive the masses in order to try to gain more control over them. And that is what we're seeing today happen right before our eyes. But we're too concerned with Republican, Democrat, black, white, gay, straight, immigrant, citizen, vaccinated, unvaccinated, right? That's the new one, and it's working in a rapid pace to divide through the disguise of public health, right? They finally found the place they can really drive a nail in us, public health, right? As if that's their concern. And if you think that is the concern, now I'm not saying that no one's dying from COVID. I'm not saying that. We're not saying any of that. But if you think their concern is public health, then you have truly eaten from their tree, right? You have drank the Kool-Aid to the point that you're stumbling all over the place, right? I'm just telling you, like, you are deep in the Kool-Aid. You swimming around in it at this point, okay? It's not about public health. So we're going to talk about some of that stuff today. Just some of the things that we're seeing, surrounding Afghanistan, surrounding COVID, surrounding Australia, surrounding the financial system. Try to step back and get a broader picture of some of these things, which maybe will help you filter what's happening so that you don't wake up one day and we find ourselves in chains. Because that's where this is headed. We're headed back to the haves and the have-nots. And the haves being the less than 1 percentile of the world, and the have-nots being everybody else. That's where this is trying to move towards. And maybe we just start off in the financial system, because I think that will kind of be the most kind of revealing of what's going on, just kind of talking about that, of just kind of pushing, or do you want to start somewhere else? I don't care.
I have a thought, but I can see how it can lead that direction.
So you want me to start? You want to start with your thought and go this direction?
Yeah,
You start with your thought and let's go that.
It might take us a minute.
That's okay. Go with it.
I know that you
thought it out.
Yeah, on the financial side, that is one of the more all-encompassing kind of things that affect us all, and so that's sort of what I'm getting at in that. But just sort of back to the ideological part of it that drives and motivates us all. One of the things that I find in talking about this, or just observing how people think about all these issues, especially among Christians, you might have actually a more willingness among non-Christians to consider the possibility sometimes. But, and you alluded to it, and we've been talking about the desire that motivates us in life, and there's this inherent selfish drive in a human being from our sinfulness that is trying to gain for ourselves. And some men take and pursue this to the fullest, and they do it without a moral or ethic guiding them, except for their own selfish motives. And so therefore it is uninhibited. It is lawless in that pursuit, and they do whatever they can. And so history is full of men who have taken and seized power and used that influence and control to maintain it until someone else came along, more powerful, more conniving perhaps, and crafty, or more vicious, that could dominate them. And, history is just full of that. That, more than anything, is the overarching narrative of humanity in human civilization.
Sure.
And so it ought be no surprise that same kind of thing is what is going on behind the scenes, perhaps, though we see the symptoms, the realities, the evidences of it there. But that same kind of process guiding what's going on in the world, where these powerful people are trying to, seize more of their power and control, and to their own benefit.
And for those men, America was the virus, right?
Well,
meaning what it stood for, democracy, those things. That was that. Like, I'm not trying to cut you off. I just think we don't consider what the world was like prior to America. Like, Americans don't consider that. Like, we don't consider, like you're saying, what has all of human history been like prior to America being established? We were the problem for those wicked men that loved to take power and suppress other men.
Well, and so to consider that, again, just from the whole of human history, what became the United States of America, what became our Constitution, our nation, our culture, and our values was itself an outgrowth and a development from a history of this struggle and tension in the dealings of humanity. But more crucially, it is the Christian faith. Yes. It is God coming into the world, saving us from ourselves with a certain revelation of knowledge, ultimately of himself in his son, and in him building his church. But that has, these reverberating effects out into the world. And of course, there's a way he testifies in the consciousness of all human beings to restrain the evil that's there, and all these things that God is graciously working in the world. But in particular, he works through his people, and he has worked through the Western world in a unique, in a particular way that doesn't, like with Israel, it doesn't make us better, doesn't make us more worthy or chosen or something valuable about us. It's his gracious choice to work through this certain vein of history, and so therefore that became the United States. And as the United States, or that is embodied in a particular way in the United States, that is a source of strength and restraint for evil in the world. Amen. It is a guide for what is actually good. So I've been thinking about this week and leading into this conversation is that because people get caught up in the Democrat, Republican, left, right, all
Absolutely.
that stuff, the U.S., the history of the Western European Christian white man, in our culture here. And they want to point out all of the horrible, wicked, evil things that have happened. And that's true. I mean, like a lot of it is true, or the instances that there's a truth to it.
Not the 1619 Project.
Yeah,
We're not talking about that is true on that level.
Sure, how you define it, how you determine what it all is another question. But looking at the examples, it's true. That's kind of what we're getting at, though, is there's a different way to interpret these events than the narrative that has captivated much of our country, whether you even know it or not sometimes. And so in our defense of the United States, we're not saying that the United States is always right or inherently right and good or anything.
No, with a certain level of freedom, there's going to be a higher level of responsibility, right? And with that responsibility, the same thing you're talking about happens. There are wicked men that with responsibility are able to do wicked things. But the system as a whole has been built upon justice, right? It's been built upon some principles and values that we can all go back to, and we can say no one is greater than the system. So when it gets out of line, slavery, for instance, when it gets out of line and men struggle in their hearts with what is objectively right, built upon this, because nothing is objectively right or objectively wrong if it's not built upon the foundation of God's word. It's just subjective, and nothing would ever, the ship would never be turned if it was subjective. But because
there'd be no reason to turn
it. Because there's an objective right and wrong, because humans have value in the Imago Dei, men struggled with that in their soul, and they turned the ship. And we righted the wrongs that we were doing with slavery. Now, was there other wicked men in those times that didn't want to right that wrong? Absolutely, because there was major profit to be made by keeping slaves. I'm a business owner. If I didn't have to pay my labor, I'm up 30 to 40% immediately, right? Immediately, right? So there was massive profits to be made based upon that wrong. And then there was also major profits to be made in the voting booth, saying that black people were 2/3 of a person, right? So you see these things that wicked men did, but on the other side, as Dustin's saying, you see these men that were grounded in something. They were grounded in something greater than themselves. They filled that gap in, setting their hopes in not themselves or their money or their position in society. They filled that with Christ. And they said, if Christ is over and above what I desire, then I can't stand for this anymore. I have to push back against this, even if I'm profiting from it, right? Even if my wallet's growing from this, I can't continue to allow this. And that's what you saw happen.
And that's what makes the reality of history so much more of an organic process, of course, and full of diverse experiences. And you can't just simplify into these easy categories that then you pigeonhole everybody in, because there's a dynamic and there's people change throughout their life and all of these things. But kind of the big picture I'm getting at is just simply to you said you were drawing out the good and the value in the potential in the United States. And just though to contrast that, there are also men from the beginning, I believe, who saw in it, perhaps because it was a threat, they saw the need to perhaps corrupt it from within so that it never materialized to become the great threat that they could see was in the ideals and values of it. So there are people seeking to undermine it ideologically from the beginning. There are also people who are seeing in it the potential to leverage it all and the freedoms and the opportunity in it for their own personal gain. And that is the good, bad, and the ugly of America. We had all this entrepreneurship and the potential in it and an industrial revolution, but there are a lot of horrible abuses along the way, and virtual slavery and the abuse of the environment. I mean, all kinds of possible things that happened that were ugly at the same time as we built this nation into the greatest nation of human accomplishment and endeavor in all of history. With that, again, becomes opportunity and threat.
Yeah.
And so both of those things coexist, and they both are potential realities now. So there's nothing in defense of the United States and what we could be is simply not saying that we necessarily have this destiny where all of these good things must materialize in the future hope of the United States, because God has ordained this blessed outcome for us because of some identity inherent to us. That's not where we're coming from. We're coming from this
Genesis 12. That's where we're coming from.
Yeah, hope that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who came
Blessing
in the flesh,
or cursed?
Of
Which
Jesus
one do you
Christ.
want to live in?
Yeah, so as much as we are hoping in that, identifying in God and who we ought to be, and trying to align our identity under that, then we hope to live in the blessing. But that doesn't. We don't expect that always means material blessedness. It actually would help us probably become more detached in ways from all that material comfort and be free truly in this world to live in service and in love to others. Not Americana per se. We're not, the blessing is not living the American dream in that. It's actually being free from the American dream in all the ways that it would shackle us. What we would actually say, I think, is that much of that American dream in a materialist sense, or even so much where your identity is in even some of these values apart from just knowing it and having it in Christ and Christ alone. America can't grant you these things. The whole point is that it doesn't.
Right. America's not supposed to be a system big enough to grant you these things, because America stood on the idea that a system big enough to grant you these things was a system big enough to take these things away from you. America was a system of individuality, that it was just supposed to be there to allow the individual
these things,
to submit under these values and principles, but to live your life free of anything big enough that could give you stuff. That you were free to go out and earn it and make your way and live out your own religion the way that you so please. The reason I think God has blessed America so much is because America's really set up the way that God wants people to reject or choose Him, right? You have the freedom to say, screw you, God, or I surrender to you, God. God's not interested in begrudged submission. He's never been. If He was interested in begrudged submission, He would have never set it up the way He did to begin with. There would not have been the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in which He designed for us to eat from. Like, that wouldn't have been in His plan. If it was begrudged submission, there would have been no tree there, and He would have said, Adam and Eve, you're going to do A, B, C, D, and E today, and then you're going to come back, and we're not really going to talk about it because there's nothing really to learn, because I'm going to tell you what you're going to do on Tuesday too. Right? So that's not how God designed the world to operate and to function. He designed it to say, hey, I'm going to give you all this world with potentiality. I'm going to put you in it with a mind to go out and to create and subdue and expand the garden. He didn't tell them to go cultivate the garden. He told them to go extend it, to expand it, right? To go out. And then He was going to be there to guide all along the way. But they had one rule and one rule only. Don't play God. That was it. Don't eat of that tree of knowledge of good and evil. Don't play God. Because if you start to play God and try to redefine things outside of reality, it's going to end terribly for you. And that's what I just bring that up because that's where we're at now. These wicked people want to redefine everything
on their own terms.
On their own terms for their own ends. And they want to use us to do it. You know, I was thinking about when you were talking about it's always kind of been this way in the past. I think people don't think long enough to really understand how Christianity the principles, the values, the reality of it has restrained evil. Like, they really don't consider that. They think that freedom could have come from a different system.
They think we evolved to
Right,
it, that it's inherent
right.
to our nature to pursue it ourselves.
But that's not even true to Darwinian evolution by natural selection. It actually would have evolved to the slavery of the less educated being ruled by the more educated, because that would have been the best way for the human population to survive. We're better educated than all you guys. We need to tell you what to do. It would be better used like China, where they tell you where to work because they look at you and they go, okay,
That's
you're
efficient.
best here. That's more efficient. You're best here and you're best here and they tell you how to live your life. And I think about that, and I think about even the days of Moses. When I talk to people about the Old Testament, they're like, yeah, it was just copied from other ancient texts in Mesopotamia, and it was just and I think about that and I go, have you ever read other texts from Mesopotamia? Have you ever read the Torah? Like, do you understand how radically different the ideas and values and principles of the Torah are compared to ancient texts in the like the Enuma Elish? Like, have you ever read that? Like, it teaches that the junior gods, that the gods created a group of junior gods, and they didn't want to work anymore, so they created humanity to serve them, a class system, right? And that Marmaduke went out and destroyed Tiamat, and Tiamat, the carcass of Tiamat, created the world, and that humanity was there to serve the junior gods. Does that not sound convenient? Like, it was not you're created in the Imago Dei. That was radically different to a group of refugee slaves who Moses was talking to, because it was the Exodus people. He was talking to a group of refugee slaves that had just left Egypt, that had been indoctrinated and educated in all the ways of Egypt, which their systems and their gods were very much the same way, a class system. Moses was talking to them, and he was saying, no, God calls you an image bearer of His. You're all individuals made in the image of God, created to be free and to go out and subdue the earth and create families individually, right? And so you just think about this, and it's like, it was so radically different. Christianity is more and more showing itself to be radically different from all the other worldviews surrounding us today.
And the whole history of the biblical account, like what the narrative defines, is the God of the Bible, the one true God, making a people for Himself, but through Moses leading and making Israel into a nation, first delivering them out of Egypt, which is the dominant world power, with evil satanic worship of their false gods and deities,
sure.
and all of its expressions amongst them. So total idolatry. God judges severely the people and their gods, and in all of the plagues, and ultimately through the Exodus, judges Pharaoh and his armies, the most powerful nation on the earth, and brings the waters down on them and destroys them. And then leads his people into the wilderness to give them the law, make them a nation, and make Himself known as the God of this people. But in doing that, he teaches them their history of them being children of Abraham, who is called out of all that godless world. So in the teaching, in the radical difference of their history and the true nature of God, as well as then their deliverance out of Egypt, God, Yahweh, and He reveals Himself to Moses and then the people, but the true God is making Himself known against all of the false, idolatrous systems of belief in world powers, and judging them as false, and showing Himself as the true God. And so the beauty of the glory of that is the God that we worship, and ultimately who came to make Himself known in his love and desire to reconcile all of humanity back to himself,
Yeah.
in forgiving our sinfulness in our hearts, our greatest enemy, not nations and world powers, but the sin in us. And so Jesus comes as the true king. And as you all like to point out, though, there's this way that through it all, God is teaching us that he and he alone is meant to be our king.
Yes.
And we ought to see his goodness, his love for us, especially in the giving of his son, and willfully surrender ourselves. And the reality is we can only do that as he graciously gives his spirit.
And when he's not, it ends as in the book of Judges. And in those days, every man did what was right in his own eyes because there was no king.
Actually, it ends even later. It passes through that and then ends in exile.
Yeah, in exile. That's right. But in that, what you see is all kinds of atrocities and wickedness that's taking place, even with the people of God, right? They revert to the Levites, revert to some of the most, the priestly order revert some of the most just disgusting and atrocious things that they're doing by the end of Judges. But there was something so human value is what we're kind of looking at here. Like, human value to the individual can only be found through the scriptures, right? Your neighbor only has the same inherent value that you have through a foundation in the scriptures. All other worldviews will ultimately lead to a devaluing of someone that believes differently than you. They just do. They will eventually devalue one another. So we start to end up in a society that looks down upon other people as less than us, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, gay versus straight, Democrat versus Republican, right? So if we don't have the framework and the foundation of the Bible, then we can't get past our disagreements without devaluing each other. The other thing that the Bible does is, from Genesis to let's stretch it all the way out to Deuteronomy, right? So right before we go into Joshua, there is a unity that's taking place, right? Because you have creation of man at Babel. Man is chapter 11, dispersed over the earth. Chapter 12, Abraham's called, right? And then we move down the patriarchs, and then all of a sudden we get to Jacob, Isaac, Jacob. He has 12 sons. And then we have this storyline with Joseph embodying the covenant well, the covenant of Genesis 12 well, right? He's being a blessing unto the nations in Egypt as second in command. And then we have this story of them being enslaved, and then the Exodus happens, and they move to this place called Sinai. And at Sinai, what you see is these 12 sons started to divide themselves out as 12 tribes. And what happened was, in slavery, they were all kind of, there was alliances, and we don't like that family line, and we don't. And so there was like all this division between these 12 tribes that had come from these 12 sons. And then at Sinai, what's happening is God is bringing unity back to the 12 tribes. And he's saying, well, you're going to become a nation called Israel. Jacob, you are Israel, right? It's going to be one nation. You know why? Because you can't move into the land without each other. You can't conquer the promised land unless you're unified. And he even goes to the extent, you see this happening as they go in through the book of Joshua. You'll have certain tribes going, yeah, we're done. We got our land. And then he comes back and goes, no. Joshua goes, no. Did you hear what God said? You have to come with us to conquer this land before you settle in your own land, right? And eventually what happens is they don't do that. They eventually stop. Joshua dies, and he says, do not stop. Finish what I started. God told you to do this. So they have to be unified to go into the land, and then they have to stay unified while they're in the land, right? So there's a unity that God is teaching in the Bible, that we are one nation under God, indivisible. There's somewhere else that goes on. I don't know what that is, but I don't know where that comes from. Where else is that? It's somewhere in another nation that I think they might have got from Israel in the land. But we'll just, we'll leave it there.
Well, and that's where, and you said this earlier, that where the United States and the form of government that's been instituted here, the way the society has been set up, provides humanity the best opportunity to most freely pursue God.
Yes.
And yes, you
However
can.
you want.
Yeah, right. Other ways too. And so then it becomes the role of the church to use that freedom to propagate the gospel and win people to Christ through the freedom that we have in this society. And yes, oftentimes it flourishes more under persecution and under less free forms of government and situations, because often in all this freedom and all this comfort and prosperity, we get spoiled, we fall off mission. We're also led astray. We're easily tempted astray, but we're also led astray.
But the difference in our system is we would fight and bleed for you to believe whatever you wanted to, above and beyond trying to force you into the system, because that's not what
doesn't work.
Because it doesn't work, and that's not what God wants. Like I said, He don't want begrudged submission. Right? So that's the beauty of Christianity, that Christians would fight and bleed for you to believe, have the freedom to believe something different, because at the end of the day, we're not the ones who are going to judge you. That's why we're bringing the gospel, the good news, that you don't have to be judged based on your own merit. Just like we don't have to, because we will fail if that's what we're judged based upon. No, there was something that was purchased for you, and it was salvation through the blood of Christ. So we offer that and we present that, and we believe you have every right to say, F you Christians, I'm going to live my own life the way I want to live. Okay, fine. You're not hurting us. You're going to have to deal with God one day in your own righteousness. And I believe you have every right to do that, and I will fight and defend that right for you to do that. But the other systems don't believe that way. Pay attention to what's going on today. They don't believe that way. You want to live in you want to be unvaccinated? Kill them. We don't believe they ought to be able to go out in public anymore. We believe they ought to be forced to do what we do. Right? It's all by force. All these other systems, all these other worldviews are by force. They are not like the Christian system. Right? And I think the beauty of what's happening around us today is it is actually drawing out such a contrast between Christianity and everybody else. Go look at the Muslim faith. In the Middle East, it's not very free. They don't believe in the freedom of other people to live the way they want to live.
It's not democratic.
So it's not just, I'm not saying the Christianity versus the secular humanism or naturalism or all that. I'm saying like even other worldviews are not democratic. There's a reason why the Western world could not establish a democratic system in the Middle East. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because their foundation is not set up for that.
Culturally not conducive to those. They do not value the same things.
Right.
That's why it's impossible. And we see in our own experience in the United States and in this part of the world, as well as in our current situation, is that it's difficult even here because there is the hard hearts that we all possess that are motivated by our selfish interest that is often unwilling to reason together to get at the truth and try to become unified through the ideals because people want what they want and they don't necessarily want to be conformed to the truth. But where people particularly dislike Christians often is when we go beyond saying you have the freedom to believe whatever you want to believe, which is true. We don't ever take away from that, but yet we believe you ought and need believe what we believe.
Yeah.
Because it's better, and it's better for you, and therefore will be better for us. It does matter to us because, and you make this point in regard to the kids and the education situation so often, we got to live with you. And our kids got to grow up with you. So we want, and we recognize we are not faultless, and we're constant, but we're submitted to a process, or a Christian ought be submitted to a process where by the Spirit and power of God, we are being conformed to the image of Christ. And so we want all people to be under the influence of that same power at work in their life, their mind and hearts being renewed in the image of Christ, their Creator. And through that, we believe we will all then become more united in Christ and therefore impact the world in such a way that we are a blessing and we would all then experience a more a blessed life through Christ.
Right. Hey guys, thank you again for tuning in to Kingdom Come. 2 things you can help us out with. 1, subscribe, and 2, comment. The YouTube algorithm is not conducive to the type of channel that we are doing, obviously. So being able to comment and subscribe will really help us out. We don't want your money. We don't want anything from you, but those 2 things will really help us out. And also share. This is something me and Dustin, we don't do this to make a living on. We do this because we are convicted surrounding what we're talking about and the need of what we're talking about for the churches and Christians to know these things so that we can communicate these things well out there in the public square.